Today's video is going to focus on the story of Halo Infinite, so it's going to contain quite a bit of spoilers. Obviously, if you haven't played the game, save it for later, come back. While you're at it, check out my Halo playlist. I got a lot of other great stuff on there. It's going to be broken out into some key areas with the timestamps below as well, so make sure you jump around if you need to. Although, I hope you listen to the entire thing because it kind of builds up, I think, as the video goes along. To begin, I think it's important to understand how we got here. And obviously, I'm talking about Halo 4, Halo 5, Halo Wars 2. I'm not going to give a complete deep dive review of all of those games, but I think there's a couple key takeaways here from those games that really did lead into the development of Halo Infinite. Halo 4 was generally accepted for the single player story, as where Halo 5 was globally panned. And I think when you look at how the story was kind of built for Halo 4, the major loss of Cortana, that very long conversation at the end of the game between John and Lasky, talking a lot about what it means to be a soldier and what it means to grieve and why do we do what we do, knowing that our friends and everything is going to constantly be put on the line, but we can't always save them. It was a really touching experience. Halo 5 took the story in a wildly different direction, with Cortana becoming the villain, rising up and building up the Created, or the Guardians as they're also referred to, and it didn't really push the narrative very well. It was introducing a significant amount of characters. By the end of the game, there were way too many people to keep tabs on. And unless you were really familiar with the transmedia universe, that is primarily books, but sometimes comic books or podcasts or the weekly Canon Fodder blog on the Halo Infinite website, many of the key story elements left people confused. So leading into this, 343 had a really big problem on their hands because they had a lot of characters that they introduced that nobody cared about. And they had a global problem that didn't necessarily resonate well with fans, particularly because Cortana was now the bad guy, and we have played so long, it's always been John and Cortana. So the fact that Cortana is evil kind of put a bad taste in everybody's mouth. Keep in mind also that, the whole Guardian saga basically put the entire world inside this, global martial law. The UNSC was definitely on its back heels, and there was this global basically takeover because there were so many Guardians and they were so powerful. There were so many of them. They were basically unstoppable. If you also remember, all the AI had basically defected, with the exception of Roland from the UNSC Infinity, as long as Isabel from the UNSC Spirit of Fire. So you really didn't have a lot of safe havens. Now, two books that came out in between Halo 5 and Halo Infinite was Halo Bad Blood and Halo Shadows of Reach, both of which kind of progressed the story again, it's the best they could outside of the kind of core game universe, but both of which did really cement just how horrible military rule was with Cortana. So the big question then is, what does 343 do? Well, they go back to their roots, and their roots, Sierra 117, make the entire story about him. This game has really been lauded as a spiritual reboot, and I can totally understand the perspective of that. We see a lot of John and the new Cortana, known as Weapon, working together in a relatively, impossible set of odds. They're really cut off from everybody. You don't really interact with many other Spartans at all. The Marines you rescue do help out occasionally. However, for the most part, it's basically you versus the world. You didn't really see that dynamic in a lot of later Halo games because you were always teamed up with other people or other Spartans. You never felt like the weight of the world was on your shoulders alone. So they go back to him, but they take it to the next level. And think of all the first things that we got to see as video game players. We saw him losing soundly at the beginning to Atriox, and I mean just absolutely demolished, thrown out into outer space, essentially to die. If you think about really, the life and times of Sierra 117, the guy doesn't lose. He's pretty much invincible. He always finds a way to survive. Even when things are at their worst, he always finds a way to progress, whether it be adrift in outer space, captured by the Grave Mind, attacked by the Flood, you name it, he finds a way out of it. We also saw him learning to cope with a new AI that wasn't Cortana. That was something you really didn't see in Halo 5 Guardians because he was so busy jibber-jabbering with all the other blue team members. Additionally, that game relied so heavily on him being chased, you really didn't even play much with him. I think it was only like 2 or 3 levels you played as him. Most of the game was played with Locke as your main protagonist, and he, again, had his own fire team, Osiris. They were talking a lot. So you really didn't have that AI hook in. So that was something that kind of, seeing Sierra 117 kind of like get back into it, learning about a new AI. That was something we haven't seen since the original Halo Combat Evolved. We also get to see a revenge plot. Again, something that isn't traditional, primarily because he always wins. Very rarely do we see him act out of vengeance or anger. There were a lot of missions in this game, side missions in particular, where you were tasked to blow up things. Understand that they served a military strategic importance. Destroy a weapons factory or ammo cache or whatever it happened to be. But don't tell me that he was not just out on the hunt. He was absolutely destroying and wrecking things. And I feel like a lot of that was fueled on revenge. And lastly, we got to see a much bigger deep dive of him grieving over the loss and his perceived failure of not saving Cortana in Halo 4. There's a lot of scenes in this game where he is very somber, and that's not typical for his character. Put him in a very different space, and I really appreciated it. But there were a lot of things we did miss out on. Blue Team, Fire Team Osiris, Sarah Palmer, Captain Lasky, Dr. Halsey, Roland, Isabel, the Guardians, the UNSC Spirit of Fire cast and crew, and there was a pretty good set of Spartans on that ship as well. Even Arbiter. And it makes you gotta wonder, do these characters matter anymore? I think some of them do in some capacity, but this story was never focused around them. It was solely focused on John. And because of that, a lot of stuff has to take a back seat. I think that kind of hurts the narrative in general because there's a lot of questions us players have going into it. And even us book nerds who've read everything up to this point, there's still a large gap in what happened. Now, I know there's a new book coming out in March, the Rubicon Protocol, which is supposed to explain the first wave of Spartans landing on Zeta Halo. And I suspect at that point, we'll get to understand what the rest of the team was up to. I'm hoping so, at least. However, that said, as again, 343 focusing on this game, there are these giant gaps of things that don't make sense. And when you just imagine if you had the ending of Halo 2, right, where it's like he's going to go blow up the bomb and what happens, and then Halo 3 picks up and it has absolutely nothing to do with what happened in Halo 2. There's absolutely no explanation. He never mentions it, and it's like months later and he's doing something else. You'd be like, wait, what happened? That's what happens here. That hurts the experience for sure. The fact that it's told slightly out of order, actually, I like that. The fact that Chief was in cryo sleep during the entire engagement. It was interesting. It was an interesting take on things because I felt like even though John knew some things, he wasn't leading on to them. And Weapon has no idea what's going on. She doesn't even know she's a clone of Cortana, which was a really cool scene as well. But it was cool for, to kind of experience everything with him for the first time. It is, though, I just wrap my head around, it is hard for 343 to tell that story without answering these questions. Even though I understand the focus is on John and his story, even though we're going to basically tell things out of order to kind of learn what happened leading up to this engagement, it's hard to kind of put all those major plot points on hold. You see a destroyed Guardian in the horizon, but it's never mentioned. Did he really succeed in destroying Cortana? Where's Atriox? What happens to the Captain Lasky and the rest of this? What happens to the UNSC Infinity? These are questions that we want to get answers to, and the game totally ignores them. And I think that hurts. I think that hurts a little bit. Understand they're embracing the transmedia universe, and I suspect we'll get more of that soon. The question, does John's story work? Well, I think yes, it does. Because it really is riveting and it's told in a very creative way. Yes, you get a typical story arc here, right? So you're going to have the hero who loses, has to go out and get stronger, confront his inner demons, and then overcome the evil. But I feel like it's more than that. There were definitely a lot of moments in the game where I was shocked as a player. And since it was told out of order, there were things and revelations that we heard that were given with very little or no context that really cut me to the core. And I was like, whoa, like, I can't believe that happened. And you start to find out that Jon knows more than he's leading on. And Weapon, who is very naive to all of this, she's learning about it for the first time, just as we, the player, are as well. Finding out about Cortana, Atriox, and Jon's ability to basically terminate Weapon at a moment's notice were really wonderful. We even get to see the real flex might of the Banished. Now, I know we saw them a lot in Halo Wars 2. There was some DLC associated with Halo Wars 2, and if you've read any of the extended stuff, you know the Banished are the real deal. But it was awesome to see them in a major Halo title, and I don't consider Halo Wars a major Halo title, sorry. It was a good game, but let's face it, right? It was cool to see such a formidable foe. You know, you constantly hear about, the big bad Covenant, the big bad Prometheans. They never posed a challenge in the Halo games because you single-handedly destroyed them over and over and over again. Here you see the Banished destroy the UNSC Infinity. Here you see the Banished destroy Jon, overtake this planet, enslave Marines, kill Spartans. They're the real deal. They are the ultimate evil that we have faced. It was cool to see a formidable foe. We've even learned about the Endless, and clearly that's set up for more adventures. I'll talk about that a little bit later in this video. But the focus is so solely set on Jon and Weapon. That perfect example. The pilot is called Pilot, or Echo, I think 216, if you have subtitles on. His name isn't even revealed to the end. It's not his story. He's irrelevant. This was Jon's story. There were two scenes in particular that I really want to highlight. The first was definitely when Jon tries to deactivate Weapon and her reaction. When Weapon touches into a part of the AI, one of the spires, to try to uncover what's going on, there is a moment where she says, somebody is fighting back. I think this is going to be offensive bias. We'll find out later in probably one of the books. However, it was awesome to see Jon disconnect from her and internally basically try to deactivate her. The fact that he used Samuel as the password hit me in the gut. If you're not familiar with who Samuel was Jon's best friend growing up. And Samuel died on one of the first missions they went on together. It's covered extensively in some of the extended universe, but it hit Jon really hard. The fact that he still remembers and uses Samuel's name was very near and dear to my heart. And even a bonus, just on a quick tangent here, the fact that they mentioned Leonidas, the AI, was awesome too, because he is featured. That AI is featured very extensively in Halo Bad Blood. The second moment that really, real quick to wrap up with that, when Weapon finds out that Jon is actually trying to deactivate her, how mad she gets at him, and somewhat in a comical way, but in a very serious way, it really hurt because you could tell that there was a lot of pain there, and how they kind of bond at the end, and Jon's like, I can't trust you, but I want to. That was such a powerful scene. That is probably the most vulnerable we have ever seen him in any of the Halo books or in any of the Halo games that I can honestly think to date. That line, I hopefully resonates with a lot of people to see that this guy is really hurting here. And we didn't really capture that emotion from him in really any other experience. That really hit me hard. You probably hear me get a little choked up about it now. The second one, for sure, was Jon embracing Escharum on the battlefield. Towards the very end, the final boss fight, second to final boss fight, I guess, right? This was really Metal Gear Solid levels of depth. It really reminded me of like the Sniper Wolf scene. There's so much mutual respect between these two guys, and they hate each other. They absolutely hate each other. Escharum trains Atriox. Atriox goes on to become this world-famous Spartan killer, basically single-handedly with his army of Banished, destroys the last bastion of UNSC. That guy is just a total badass, right? And the fact that Jon comforts him on his deathbed, and they kind of talk, about like how they're just weapons. Even the pilot getting upset with Jon, and Jon's like, no, you don't understand. And I'm like, damn, you don't understand. Like, these guys there's so much bad blood and so much hatred between them. They've caused so much destruction to each other, and they've both been the reason the other has lost so much in these wars. Yet at the end of the day, when it's over, they can accept defeat in a way, kind of mend fences. I know that probably sounds odd If you're a fan of UFC like I am, I can't tell you how many times two guys go into a ring hating each other's guts, but at the end of the fight, win, lose, or draw, there's a mutual respect, and they come to just realize the other person's such a warrior. That boss fight was so intense, and it was really cool to see that. I like that John was that way, and he wasn't just like, shooting the guy when he was down, but kind of embraced him and just accepted that, the battle was over with him. And I think in a way, we'll see how the Banished recuperate from this. Now, we thought at that point losing Atriox, we know that he's still alive somewhere. But the fact that at this point, Escharum and Atriox are dead, that kind of symbolized kind of the end of the Banished, at least in that regard. And it was just a very somber moment. I really enjoyed that scene quite a bit. I also want to give a major shout out before I forget to all of the rendered cutscenes in the game. So unlike other games where the cutscenes are like canned, these were all rendered in engine in real time. Holding a weapon that I used in a cutscene was insane. The fact that I went into a battle carrying a skewer and I still had it, or a plasma pistol, or any of the weapons that I picked up, and the fact that they were there felt so immersive and real to me. It was like, wow, that's my actual weapon. I can't tell you how aggravating is maybe a pet peeve. Maybe nobody noticed this. In all the other Halo cinematics, you could go into a battle with a rocket launcher and a gravity hammer. And in the cutscene, John's holding an MA-40. And it's like, that just doesn't feel real. So it was so awesome to see the weapons you carried actually rendered the way that he meant to hold them. And that includes some of those big guns like the plasma cannon. It was just so neat to see. I know I'm rambling here a little bit, but it's definitely a major, major plus for me in that department. So wrapping up this video, I have to ask, what's next? And I think quite a bit. I mean, 343 has been really honest that this is not the end. And I can't imagine that they're just going to so really nonchalantly finish off the Cortana and Guardian story. I think we all deserve a better explanation of that in particular. These were big bads. The Prometheans dominated Halo 4 and Halo 5 extensively. I mean, you fought Warden Eternal like, 14 times in Halo 5 Guardians? These guys just can't be forgotten so easily. There has to be more to that. And I can understand that maybe Weapon was this advanced AI. And again, if you're really curious to understand a little bit more about that mission, I highly recommend you read Halo Shadows of Reach. But if not, at least understand that this was a major Hail Mary by the UNSC to capture Cortana. I recognize and understand that. However, the fact that she just dies so nonchalantly, the fact that the Guardians are gone and just basically lay down and die, doesn't make sense to me. And especially since it impacted John specifically so much. If the new 343 is going to take this stance and say, you know what, we're going to get rid of a lot of these other characters. We introduced you to like 12 characters in Halo 5 Guardians. Forget them. This is about Sierra 117. Fine. But make sure it's a clean slate leading into that moment. Don't just say it's a clean slate because it's a clean slate. There has to be a rational reason behind it. We need some closure on that. And I also think it'd be nice to get some closure on anybody else who was ancillary to him. If Lasky they consider an ancillary character, I personally don't, but if they do, that's fine. At least wrap up his story, wrap up the interaction between him and Sarah Palmer. And if John is going to go off and be the official Halo hunter for the rest of his career, that's fine. Let him just go do that. And let's divorce him from the greater conflicts of UNSC. We'll leave those in the books. We'll leave the other Spartans to fight the conflicts. And John is just the official Halo hunter. I could accept that. And that's perfectly fine. I was really surprised, though, that this wasn't a changing of the guard game. And I really thought many people thought we would start to see that. I know Spartan Jerome, who's featured prominently in Halo Wars and Halo Wars 2, was definitely a frontrunner candidate to kind of pick up the mantle. That didn't turn out at all. And that's fine. But Steve Downes, and I love the guy, he's 71 years old. Do you really see Steve Downes acting as a Master Chief character going into his late 70s? Because I don't. So at some point, something's going to have to change. And maybe they just change his voice, and that'll be hard for us all to accept. Or maybe he's recorded a ton of voice lines for the next 10 Halos, so it doesn't matter. But I have a feeling that we're going to have to address this problem sooner than later. Jen Taylor is in her mid-40s, I believe, so she's still relatively young, and especially with her great performance regarding Weapon, but being young and vibrant and kind of naive to the world, I suspect that that character has plenty of room to grow, really with any Spartan, because she just doesn't understand the world at all. And it was such a coming-of-age story for her, as much in a weird way as it was for John. But I think the future is bright for these guys. There's definitely so many things we don't know about. Chief definitely has a new big bad to chase in the Banished, unless they're destroyed, or at least the Endless for sure. But I also could easily see him and Weapon riding off into the sunset after this. This is really the quote-unquote happiest ending we've gotten in a Halo game. And think of the ending of Halo 2, 3, 4, and 5 in particular, any of those games. Think of how they ended. Was there closure there? Maybe Halo 4, you could argue a little bit. Halo 1 definitely had closure because it seemed like he won and flew away. But you got to keep in mind that 2, 3, 4, 5, definitely he was left hurting or in a major predicament or thought for dead or in the middle of combat or being chased or exiled, whatever, right? So it was really nice to see that we have some closure, at least in this game. And that's why I feel like if they wanted to, I don't think they will, but this could be a stopping point for them. But I doubt it. I suspect Sierra 117 will ride again, and I'll be ready when he does. Probably another couple of years, depending on what the DLC brings in. So we'll see how that works out. And wrapping up this video really with the DLC specifically, we do know that there is some DLC planned, tentatively named the Endless. Clearly is going to focus on a lot of the trials and tribulations that we saw. But I think this would be a good opportunity for 343 to sneak in just a little bit more on some of the other characters, so at least we know what they're up to. Halo Infinite doesn't have to be the be-all, end-all. The great thing about this transmedia universe that is created with all of the books and ancillary tales that they can tell on all the various mediums that they could present stories to us, it doesn't only have to be in Halo Infinite. I'm not expecting that at all. But if we're going to turn Halo, in the video game at least, into the story of Sierra 117, that's fine, but let's get a clean slate going into it. So I think this DLC has some good stuff riding on it. There's clearly more to explore and see and do. I know this game had a lot of cut content for all the creative reasons leading into the development of it. That could be a great starting point, for him to go explore other portions of the ring. The ring is massive, and he only explored a very small part in just a few short days. I think the whole story took place in like 2 or 3 days at most. So there's a very easy way to write in, everybody's alive and they're on the next mountain over. And okay, let's all reunite. Okay, good. Everybody gives each other a high five. Now back to work. I could see that, and that's fine if that's what they want to do. But I think that there's a lot more here. And I think now that we know that Zeta Halo is the home of the Endless and there's more to that race specifically, I feel like there's a lot of great jumping off points, and it may be a great way to revisit some of the older rings, assuming there are mysteries on those Halo rings too that we just didn't quite uncover at the time. Time will tell. I'm ready for the ride. I can't wait to see what happens next. But overall, I'd have to say this story really did hit me in the feels where it mattered. It left me thinking and pondering in very positive ways, and I can't help but recommend it enough to my friends. I hope you guys found this deep dive review informative, interesting, and maybe made you think about things in a slightly different light. But I'd love to hear from you guys below, so sound off with some questions or comments. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.